Good evening, buenas noches, and thank you for tuning in. Come on in. On behalf of all of us at the locally based, independently owned bookstore, Books and Books in Miami, Florida, and in partnership with Miami Book Fair and our indie bookstore friends, Book People in Austin, Texas, the King's English in Salt Lake City, Utah, RJ Julia in Madison, Connecticut, and University Bookstore in Seattle, Washington, it's my pleasure to welcome you to a virtual evening with Alex Segura to discuss Secret Identity, a rollicking literary mystery set in the world of comic books, published by our friends at Flatiron Books. Alex Segura is the Senior Vice President, Sales and Marketing at Oni Press and the author of Star Wars Poe Dameron Freefall and the acclaimed Pete Fernandez mystery series. He has also written a number of comic books, most notably the superhero noir The Black Ghost, the YA music series The Archies, and the Archie Meets collection of crossovers. A native of Miami, he lives in New York City. To moderate this evening's program, we're joined by Chantal Acevedo, the author of the novels Love and Ghost Letters, A Falling Star, The Distant Marvels, and The Living Infinite. Chantel's middle grade duology Muse Squad, called Riveting and Suspenseful by School Library Journal, is published by Balzer and Bray. She's a professor of English at the University of Miami, where she directs the MFA program. Welcome, both of you. Just a quick reminder to our audience that throughout this evening's broadcast, you can post questions in the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen, and please order your copy of Secret Identity from your favorite independent bookstore. And now, without further ado, let's welcome our guests to the virtual stage.
Thanks so much. Hello.
Hello. Can you hear
It's
me?
good. Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, great. Yes, it's so good to see you. Thank you.
I know, it's likewise.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing this. It's always a big ask.
No, are you kidding me? This is such a treat. It's such a
Is
treat.
this like your reading room? Like,
this is my office. My house is really, really tiny, and so we've had to carve out all these little Warren-like spaces in the house during the pandemic. You know, we realized we were all on top of each other, and so I was able to get this. But you can sort of see tiny kitchen.
Oh yeah.
Which I will now block.
No, this is like my office vestibule. There's no door. It's just, this is like a little corner where I work.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I think we've all gotten so used to now we're just working from home and making these spaces work for us. But yes, this is such a treat for me. I have adored this book since I read it months ago.
I'm so glad. It meant so much when you said that.
Thank you for that. And just having it now sort of here in real life is such a treat. You know, it's funny, you know, when you have a friend who has a book coming out, you always get so excited for them and the possibilities of that book. But this book, I remember when you first described it, I thought, if a human being could take a book form, right? If Alex Segura could become like manifest
into a book,
it would be Secret Identity, right? Because it's noir, it's comic books, it's like, you know, nostalgic, it's Miami, it's New York, it's you.
Yeah, it's everything I want to do, and it's all the kind of things I like to read about and talk about. But it's funny, somebody called it a culmination, which makes me kind of dread the next book. Like, I'm going to keep writing after this one, so I don't want it to be like this apex and then there's nothing else. But I just wanted to write about my passions, like things that I love, and I love everything I write is going to have a connection to Miami. Like Carmen is very much a Miami, a Cuban American from Miami. The comics, when I read Cavalier and Clay in college, I loved it. And the first thing the thing that I left with was, I really wish I could have read the comics that they're talking about. So I thought, when I do this comic book noir, I'll have the comics in there. So it's like a melting pot of all my favorite things in one book, which was really fun.
Yeah, well, it's such a good book. It's called the sort of the spiel about it. You see the rollicking literary mystery, but I mean, it really is, it really is just fun. It's a page turner, but it's got a lot of depth to it as well. Carmen feels so real. Like I feel like a kinship with Carmen, in some way. So like I just I just love it. Do you want to give the pitch to anyone who hasn't
Yeah, for
picked it
sure.
up yet? Yeah.
Yeah, so Secret Identity is set in 1975, and it's the story of Carmen Valdez, who's a queer Cuban American woman who moves from Miami to New York. And she grows up loving comics. Her and her dad go to La Farmacia and buy comics every week, and it's a bonding experience for them. She learns how to read English from Archie and Betty and Veronica, and it's very much a part of her being. And she moves to New York to try to get a job as a secretary at this kind of third-rate publisher, comic publisher called Triumph Comics. And she does it to get a foot in the door, to see if she can get a chance to write, because that's her dream. But as the book opens, we see a conversation between her and the owner of the company, this guy, kind of a blowhard named Jeffrey Carlisle, and he basically says, "Look, it's just not going to happen for you. I like you. You're a great secretary, but how would that look? Me giving work to my secretary? Like, I have all my buddies I have to keep paid." And he brushes her off, and so she feels despondent. And it's kind of, I think everyone that was in their late 20s feels that moment at some point when you kind of just crash and you're like, this is not going to happen. The dream is not happening. And so she goes back to her apartment, and she comes across this junior editor, this guy named Harvey, who, has a crush on her and is kind of like her only real friend in the office. And he says, "I have this chance to write, Triumph's first female superhero. I have nothing. I'm not prepared. I'm not ready. I told the boss it was going to be awesome, and I have nothing. Can you help me? I know you like to write." The only catch is she needs to write it anonymously, because Carlisle her boss has already told her it's not happening. And so if she does this, it just kind of goes against whatever edict he has. And so Carmen's very smart. She's very sharp. She's very driven, and she sees like all the red flags that are like spread out in front of her, but she does it anyway, because when like your dream is dangled in front of you, like, what are you going to do? So she writes it with Harvey, and they create this character called the Legendary Lynx, who's kind of like a daredevil Batman type character. This woman who has like claws and street level powers, not powers, but she's like a street level superhero. And it becomes a huge hit for Triumph, like their biggest hit, and everyone loves it. And then Harvey's murdered. And so all the scripts were turned in with Harvey's name. No one knows Carmen's involved. And she's watching the character get slowly pulled away from her. Like, eventually the scripts are going to run out and they're going to hand it to somebody else. And so she's desperate to figure out what happened to her friend, but she also wants to reclaim this character that is like so much a part of her and so much a part of growing up and loving comics. And so that's the setup.
Yeah.
And there's actual comics in the book, I should note.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's actual sequences.
Mhm.
I should have come better prepared, I guess. But there's like actual every few chapters, there's like comic book pages that show you what's going on with the links as Carmen is writing them.
Yeah, no, they're brilliant. My favorite is actually an early one. And just in case, I know that Alex gave you like a very full pitch, but I think that's maybe the first, that's early. Like, all of this happens really early, and then the action, takes off. I think one of my favorite pages is when she's surrounded by those like void guys.
Oh, the voidoids.
Yeah, them. That was like, I actually got like a little chill on that.
Oh, good. Yeah, they're creepy.
Yeah, they were creepy. It gave me like vibes of here, I found it. For those of you at home, like that scene right there.
Yeah, it's really, really disturbing.
So good. It's very Walking Dead, but it also reminded me of the original Karate Kid, when the Cobra Kai kids beat up Danielson, right?
That's right. Yeah, maybe I subconsciously thought of that when I told when Sandy drew that.
Yeah, well, I'm super into it. I'm even wearing a Lynx-ish shirt,
I love it.
Prepared to our conversations. But we have a comic book family that my husband takes one look at me and goes, "So what's up, Craven the Hunter?"
Oh, nice. Yeah, deep cut.
Nice, but that's not what I'm going for.
He didn't say cheetah or tiger.
Yeah, exactly. But since we're on this topic of the comic book, I know that you have, an artist, Sandy Jarrell, and Taylor Esposito as a letterer. And so most novels aren't a team effort like that, but you have these instances where you got to work with other folks. And what was that like, letting them into your book, to your bigger story?
It felt weird. I don't know. It was a little strange at first, because to me, my novels are my personal, like, it's just my purely unfiltered story. Like, comics are so collaborative, and it's about like letting go a little bit so the artist can add and build on your story. But I always envisioned this book as having comic book sequences, and Sandy's an old friend of mine, and I feel like he was like particularly perfect because he's not only a great artist, but he gets comic book history. Like, we have long conversations about comic book history and trends and things like that. So I knew he could like evoke the style without seeming like he was imitating it. Like it doesn't look like, oh, he's trying to do Frank Miller or he's trying to do like Bill Sienkiewicz or any artist from that era. He's doing his style, but he's evoking it, evoking the past, which I thought it's a really like thin, a hard needle to thread. And I think he did a good job. And Taylor is a pro, and he made it look so it wasn't like computer lettered. It looks like someone hand lettered it, which is a really hard thing to accomplish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but it was fun.
Really beautiful, really detailed. And for those of you, once you get your hands on the book, once you get to those pages at the bottom in really tiny script, right? It's all the details of who the writers are and all that. And those are clues too, you know, as you're going through.
That was me geeking out. Like that was those little nerd clues. Yeah.
Well, they reveal story before the story does. Like, you know what I mean? Like it was just working on lots of levels. But I want to ask you, I have lots of questions, but before I ask this next question, I want to remind folks to please do feel free to put your questions in the chat or in the Q&A button in the bottom, and we'll make sure to leave time to answer your questions. But before I ask you the next question, I wanted to ask Alex, is there a passage you'd like to read just to give us a taste?
Yeah, let me read the prologue. I like the prologue. I think it's good. It kind of sets the stage for Carmen as a character. Okay. Prologue. Her eyes fluttered open at the sound. Carmen Valdez rolled out of her small twin bed with ease, the muscle memory kicking in. Even now, in the middle of the night, the shrill scream was familiar too. She tiptoed across her small bedroom, avoiding the toys strewn on the floor as she made her way to the door. Another scream. Mommy. The screaming and arguing were routine. Carmen found that she'd become numb to it. She could almost predict it in the hours before bed. If Mommy and Papi were drinking that stuff, it was a bad sign. It meant they were changing, becoming meaner, darker, something else. She would rush through her routine, rush to get to the relative safety of her room, her closed door, her darkness. But she also knew the darkness could only shield her from so much. It hid her, but it didn't silence them. She knew the screams would come. Carmen would just pray she could sleep through them. She took the steps slowly and sat in her usual spot. They lived in a compact 3-bedroom house in a suburban slice of Miami. It was worn out in a lived-in, comfortable way. It was home. Carmen loved it here, felt safe here most of the time. She held on to the spindles of the thick faux wood banister and looked down onto the tiny living room, lit only by a flickering lamp that loomed over her parents. The screaming had stopped for now, replaced by a sound Carmen had never heard, at least not from her father. Sobbing. ¿Por qué? ¿Por qué, Clara? Why? Why are you doing this? Her father's stiff, unfamiliar English surprised Carmen. Her parents always spoke to each other in Spanish. It was their language, their way. English was something else, a chore, a means to an end. To hear her Cuban father force himself to speak English, while crying no less, gave Carmen a disorienting feeling that made her question if she was even awake. Get up, Pepe, párate. Háblame como un hombre, por Dios, Carmen's mother said, her words tight and seething through gritted teeth. Her father's sobs continued, racked, painful cries that amplified Carmen's dizzy, frightened feelings. The ground under her felt uncertain. Her world seemed shaken and malleable. She didn't like that. She felt her face redden, the tears sliding down her cheeks slowly as she fought back the whimpering sounds she knew would come anyway. What had she done? What had made her parents this way? What could she do to fix it? Before she could ponder it further, her mother's eyes met hers, pulsing with rage at first, then softening with surprise and shame. The entire spectrum of emotions playing out in less than a second. Carmen tried to push herself back into the shadows, but it was too late. She'd been spotted. She did it anyway. She heard her mother's slow footfalls as she approached the banister, could almost feel her looking up at the spot where Carmen had been. Carmencita, ¿qué haces? Her mother asked, her voice mannered and forced, clearly trying to not sound like she'd had too much of that stuff to drink. Trying to sound like she was her usual daytime mommy. Es muy tarde, mijita. Carmen didn't respond. She pivoted her small body away from her crying father and slowly crept back to her room. Carmen had built defenses for these nights, these dark moments where her life felt unmoored, unsafe. She'd think about better times, warmer times, walking to La Farmacia with Papi, his big hand in hers, the smell of his sweat and cologne mixing together to create a familiar, comforting feeling. His worn features shifting into a tired smile as he held the door open for her, his princesa. They wouldn't go far. They didn't come to the pharmacy for medicine usually. They'd make a beeline for the magazine aisle, past the glossies and paperback books, to a wireframe spinner rack loaded with pictures so colorful and welcoming that they practically whispered Carmen's name as she approached. The red, white, and yellow of the Flash, the patriotic gear of Captain America, the muted green and yellow insectoid costume of the Fly, the gray, red, and black of the Dusk. It was their ritual, their special routine. Boppy would walk with her. She'd step back and watch him spin the rack, his fingers gently touching the stacks of comics as it went around and around. He'd grab one or two, show them to Carmen, and then recite a brief description. Batman tiene mucha fuerza, pero es muy inteligente también, Carmencita. Or Captain America, un hombre bueno, decente. Then they'd walk to the cash register, and like clockwork, her father would tell her how, as a newly arrived Cuban immigrant with a wife and baby daughter, he'd learned to read English with comics. Learned about this country they now called home from the adventures of people like Superman, the Blue Beetle, Martian Manhunter, or the Freedom Alliance. Carmen would nod and smile. She knew the story by heart, but she loved it. She loved this man, good-hearted and strong. Fallible, but always striving to be better. Carmen thought back to those moments as she climbed the stairs on all fours, like a cat trying to wiggle through a fence without making a sound. She needed to go back to her safe place. She needed to cover herself, hide herself with a cloak of her own creation. Only then, in her cramped room, loaded with boxes of comics and drawings and ideas, would she be safe. She had to become someone else to survive. All right.
I love that. And then
it's intense. I was like getting a little choked up there for some reason.
And that last line, right? Because it just opens up the story. She's going to become someone else. And
right.
Part one is origin story, which I love. Yeah. I love that too so much. Yeah, I mean, I think you've captured, in just a brief moment, you captured Miami, right? You captured those voices, right? The language, even the little spinning rack, that I remember when comic books were in grocery stores,
I know, yeah, like Eckerd Drugs. I would always go to Eckerd Drugs to buy my comics.
Yeah, totally. Like I think one of my earliest memories is actually the little Archie comics always in the checkout.
At Publix.
Yeah, they're still there. Like that one doesn't change. I think that's eternal. But yeah, no, thank you so much for letting us hear Carmen's voice.
Of course, yeah.
It always helps.
My daughter's screaming.
Oh, it's fine. Someone was shouting. I was muted earlier here too.
Okay.
Well, I have a question for you about sort of the inspirational, like what was the inspiration point for you? Like how did this, like where is it the seed of this idea? What was the very first thing?
I think, I was finishing up the Pete Fernandez books, and this was before I knew I was going to be doing a Star Wars novel. And I knew I wanted to do something, I don't want to say bigger, but I wanted to do something that wasn't just like part of a series or, episodic in any way. I wanted to do something that took readers somewhere else and took them to another place. Kind of, Megan Abbott's one of my favorite authors. And what she does really well is she takes noir and she brings it to other worlds, like gymnastics or cheerleading, like with Dare Me. And I thought, why hasn't anybody done like a comic book noir, like a murder mystery in comics, but with comics in them? And then, so I had that kind of framework, but I didn't know when I was going to set it. And then Carmen kind of showed up, in the way characters just sometimes do. And she reminded me of so many people I knew, and she like appeared so like fully formed that I was like, she has to be the star. It has to kind of funnel through her and funnel through Miami. And then it's going to be New York in the 70s, which to me is so much fun comparing it to New York of today. Like the book is a lot about contrast. Like comics are not like that anymore. Like comics are everywhere. Like you can turn on Disney Plus and you get any character you could ever imagine. Like that's the new spinner rack. You just put on your TV and you can choose whatever comic story. Whereas before, I think when we were kids, it was like, we would dream of like a Spider-Man movie or things like that, and in the 70s, it was even more detached. It was like comics were failing. People thought comics were just going to die out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just love that you were able to merge these things together. I think the mashup, right, is where some of the most magical things happen. I think
what really clicked for me was when I realized that the murder was going to, like, it wasn't just going to be a random like murder of whatever, like it was tied to a character. I was, amateur PIs are so different because you really have to pull them in. Something has to really like essential has to pull them into the story. And what's more important than losing like a piece of yourself? And so like, I knew I had to build up the connection between Carmen and the Lynx. so much that when it gets yanked away, she has no choice but to like become the detective kind of.
Right, right. And there are lots of different stakes. It's not just the comic, but it's
Yeah, it's her friend. Yeah,
is she a suspect? It's her friend, right? This other mysterious woman who shows up in her life. We won't
right.
give more of the novel away at this point.
Yeah.
But, you know, you mentioned the book being set in New York in the 70s, in the comic industry in the 70s. And so I'm wondering about research you did, because I think hopefully I'm not overstepping and saying we were both born in the 70s, but I don't remember the 70s.
Yeah, I don't.
Not
I'm
really.
an 1980. I just snuck in right at the beginning of the 80s.
Right. Yeah, because I was in kindergarten in 1980. So like I don't remember it at all. So what is the research that you had to do?
Well, first and foremost, I wanted to make sure that I was evoking what it was like to be a woman, a queer woman, a woman in comics in the 70s. And so I had to, I had sensitivity readers and beta readers, but I also interviewed a lot of people, a lot of women that worked in comics at the time. And I just kind of ran the idea by them. I talked them through what the story was, and a lot of them said, "Yeah, that sounds like that sounds realistic." And they shared their stories, which were so valuable. Like, and a lot of that texture ends up in the novel, like stuff like the volleyball game. I didn't know that Marvel and DC played volleyball games in Central Park every week, and so I just thought, well, why can't Triumph like play a game? And other stuff like just what it was like to work in the bullpen as a woman, and how it was, not so much about like, a little bit about misogyny, but a lot about like just kind of really having to fight a little extra to be seen and have some purchase in this industry that was very male dominated. And then just reading, for me, it was not really research. It was like fun. Like it was like reading about comics, history books about comics. There's this fantastic book called The 10-Cent Plague by David Hadju, who has written a lot of great biographies, but it's about the 50s. It's about like that comics, that the issue with the horror comics where the government kind of cracked down and then the comics code came up. Anyway, but it starts with a chapter about a woman comic creator who lost her job because of this implosion of the industry and just never made it back, like was just never in comics again. And I thought that's when it clicked for me, and when Carmen like really showed up, and I thought, well, what if the star is this woman who writes this character, loses the character, and then just, I don't want to spoil anything, but then like that just affects her career like very endemically. And that's where research is great. It just gives you like these little springboards.
Yeah. Well, I want to come back to that, actually, a particular moment in relation to that, like that feeling of loss. But before, I don't want to step away from the research question just yet, because I'm wondering if there's anything that you learned in your research that didn't make it into the book, but that you think is fascinating.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm such a like journalistic like researcher. Like once I have enough, like a squirrel, like once I have enough, I'm good. Like so I'm blanking on something specific, but a lot of it was like little anecdote. Oh, there was one, I spoke to one comic book creator, and I needed a character like, like a linchpin character, like a character that serves as a little bit of an oracle and kind of nudges Carmen along. And later in the book, it becomes somebody else. But at one point, it was going to be this real person who had died relatively young in the 70s and was very well loved in comics. And for whatever reason, I was just like, it just didn't work. And I didn't want to be misspeaking for someone who was gone. And so, the character it ended up being, it actually ended up working out a lot better. But yeah, that was like a could have been and should have been or might have been, but I think it all worked out for the best.
Yeah. What I find, what always happens to me, my adult novels are all historical, and what always invariably happens, the novel will be published, it's done and dusted. 2 months later, I will run across some detail, and it'll be like in the dumbest place. It'll be like on Twitter. You know what I mean? Like obscure thing someone tweets, and it'll be like, I can't believe that
I missed it.
Yeah, like that's what they actually would have worn, or that's actually what happened. And then I feel like, how did I miss it?
How much runway do you give yourself for research? Because your stuff is much more steep. I mean, mine is recent history, but
yeah, but it's still, I know it stinks to call it historical, but it is, right?
Yeah.
Not ancient history, but no, I think like you, right? I researched to the point where I can start working. And then I did back when I have questions like, wait, how fast does a 19th century tall ship go? And then you have to then go back and do the research, but there's always something. I think the worst example of this was I gave a talk at the university, and I said something like, I just couldn't find X out. Like I looked everywhere, and 10 minutes after it's done, my dean sends me an email. It's like, I found it.
Oh God, yeah, they dunking on you.
It was so embarrassing. But anyway, and he did. It was great. And I had somehow had missed it. So
It's
yeah,
hard. I mean, you're never, one thing I tell people, it's like, I'm so thankful to my beta readers and the people that help me with research, and all the mistakes are mine. Like all the good things and the correct things are theirs. And, if there's a mistake, it's my fault.
there's so much, right? At least we
Yeah.
can always blame that. We just say we're fiction writers. This is a novel.
Yeah, it's not
Right.
real.
The historians have a whole other job,
Yeah,
to do.
exactly.
Yeah. Well, going back to this question of sort of Claudia or Carmen, no,
Mhm.
Carmen.
Yeah, Carmen.
Claudia is the lynx.
Yeah.
Carmen is the writer of the lynx. That sense of sort of separation and loss. There's a moment, it's about a third of the way in, where Carmen realizes that she's lost control of the lynx, that it's in the hands now of someone else, right? And that she's been betrayed.
Mhm.
And that moment, it was a gut punch reading that, right? Both as a woman and as an artist. And I think it is, and it's these men who have taken it from her,
Yeah.
too. So that adds a layer. But just as an artist, I think one of our biggest fears is that our ideas will be taken from us, or we won't get the credit for the thing that we've worked so hard for, or whatever. And it's all happening to our ones. And so I was wondering about writing that scene, and like how did you access those emotions?
It was hard. I mean, I felt really, I guess the good writing is you're torturing your characters, and that is torture. It's like her greatest fear, like this, and just to backtrack a bit, one of my favorite moments with Carmen early on is when Harvey proposes the idea. She says, kind of hesitantly, okay, and they get to work, and he's like just coming in like, oh, let's try this, like totally spur of the moment. And she busts out these notebooks and these details and these scripts, and she's like, I've been working to this moment for years. So she comes in prepared, she comes in like ready to achieve her dream, and then it gets yanked away. And so that was really hard to write, because the best noir, like for me, noir is about these primal emotional moments, not like calculating or logic or strategic. It's like she gets the rug pulled out from under her and she has no idea what to do, and she reacts like in a panic, like she acts irrationally. She is pulled by desperation, and that to me is good noir, when you paint someone into a corner and they have no choice but to like kind of claw their way out. No pun intended, but she has to like try to figure out what to do. And it was hard, because as an artist, that's one of my greatest fears. It's like you work on something, you think it's yours, and then suddenly it's gone. And then it's something we deal with, I think, in IP. Like when you write IP, like somebody else is going to write it and they may like negate your story, or they may like ignore your story, or it just may go away. But I think also as a professional writers, we've kind of come to the point where that's a little bit more, we understand the lines. Like back then there was no line, there was no work for hire versus creator owned. Like you just worked for hire, and it was never going to really be yours. But she didn't fully understand that, and so when it hits her in the face, it's like a jolt.
And it's betrayal on lots of different levels, right? It's a friend who's done the betrayal, and it's embarrassing because her boss is involved, and she's a woman and she knows that she might not be believed if she says, hey, right? Like, so there's so many awful layers to it. Like, just my heart breaks for Carmen in that scene every time.
I feel so bad for her too, because she has really conflicted feelings about Harvey. Like she likes him as a person and as a friend, but then he does this very it's a very stark betrayal. Like he put his name on it and left no hint that maybe anyone else had helped. Like he could have just said, hey, I have a collaborator, at some point I'll let you know who it is. But he just leaves her high and dry. And so she has some resentment, and so she has to kind of work through that, which is really hard. Like friendships are hard like that.
Right. He forces her into a secret identity. In fact,
I know. Yeah. She's like, she can't be her true superhero self.
She's got to claw her way into the industry.
Exactly.
No, I mean, it's really great. That scene too, the scenes preceding that, when she and Harvey are collaborating, like they're in collaboration mode. I also enjoyed that a lot. And I've been working on a couple of collaborations, about some, right? And maybe others, but it's so fun to do. It's so fun to sit with another person who's like-minded, right? Who's on that same like imagination train, as you, and bounce ideas back and forth. And you've done both, right? You've done single author work and collaborative work. Do you have a preference?
I mean, I love collaborating. I think there's a lot to be said. Like, we've worked together on stuff, and I've collaborated with others. And I think the ideal collaborator adds to what you would bring and makes it greater than the two pieces. Like there's just, it just adds a different flavor, I guess, for lack of a better term, that you couldn't create on your own. But I also like writing by myself sometimes. Like Secret Identity is is a thing that I could only write myself. Like I know there's comic sequences that are collaborations, but the prose felt like I couldn't have written it with somebody else. Like it's such a pure like thing coming from me, like from my heart. So but I love collaborating because I like to see how other people work too. And I like to work with people that are creative and imaginative. And also like, I like to think I have a good work ethic, and I like to work with people that are like as dedicated and like sit down and do the work, which is hard.
Yeah, it's best. It's definitely two different modes, you know.
Mhm.
Like I grew up an only child. My mom remarried when I was 14, so I got a stepsister who
Oh,
was
cool.
7 and I was 14, and so we had that that kind of a sibling relationship that started for me kind of later, right? Then it
Yeah,
would
interesting. Yeah.
like I always say I remember a childhood without her, but she doesn't remember one without me, you know.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That's
Are you guys still close? Or?
oh yeah, totally. She was here yesterday with
Okay.
my nephew, but I since I got to have a little bit of both, and of course I have my cousins here growing up, when I think about collaborative work and working alone, I think of it sort of like when you're an only child and it's just you in the house and you're just playing with your toys. Like that's working alone. It's great, you know what I mean? But it's all like right in here. It's not even out loud most of the time, you know. But when you're playing with a friend or a cousin or a sibling, it's like, and what if this happened? Yeah, but then this happened, right? And like the rules.
Yeah, then this shows up, and you're like,
you know? And when it's so good.
Yeah, when it's good. And I think it's also like not having a big ego. I think when like you and I work together, it's not like we're not precious about stuff. Like, you know, if I change something or you change something, it's never like, oh my God, how could you do that? You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, just Christina's reminding everyone to chat, and I am too. Don't forget to post your questions. You can do them in the Q&A or in the chat, right? I wanted to go back to the links.
Okay.
And I think I've got like maybe 3 questions for you. So folks, let's get those questions going.
I'm ready.
Yeah. But, here's a links question for you. What was it like? Because you have the novel, you have Carmen's story, but then you have the Lynx's story. Like, what was it like having to, like, on deadline, have 2 stories that you had to create at the same time?
It was hard because I think it looks just not to assume, but it looks deceptively simple to have just a few comic book pages. But all the work that goes into creating a full comic book series still went into like creating the Lynx. Like, so I had to think about who is Claudia Gala and who is the Lynx, like, and how does it fit into the story I'm trying to tell with Carmen, and how does it echo Carmen, but how is it different from Carmen? Like in many ways, like the Lynx is Carmen's id. Like, how would Carmen love to react? She'd love to like claw somebody in the face that wronged her and like be the hero. But it's also, I also didn't want it to feel like one for one. So it was hard. And one of the things that we're eventually going to do is do like just full Lynx comic books, because we did all this work. We did all this work to create this world. So like, I want to do like a very meta like collection that is like, it won't even have my name on it. It'll just like be like a lost collection and have like the credits of the people in the book, like totally super meta. But I love the character. It just seems like the kind of comic I would want to read. And that's what we want to do, right? You want to write a book that you would read, or that feels like for you.
I felt a little, to be fair, a little gypped, because I was like, I want the rest of the Lynx. Like the pages we get they don't feel like a shortcut. It doesn't feel like, let me just pop in a fake scene here, right? It's ripped from some bigger thing that I don't get to see, right? And
you'll see it. You're gonna see it.
Oh my God, that's and I love the meta idea of it too. Do you remember that novel that Lev Grossman's The Magicians?
Yes, I love that book.
I love that book too. The first one I adored. And there was I don't know if you ever caught the website. The website was I don't know if it's still up, it might still be up. It was a university website for that magical college, right?
What was the name of the school?
I forget.
Something, I forgot. Yeah.
I forget. Oh, Break Bills. It was Break Bills.
Yeah.
But it was a full-on university website. It was better than the universities I've worked at. Like it was, I mean, every intricate detail of a university's website was.
Yeah, that's what I want. I want to create something. So if somebody picks it up, they could think like, they'll really think like, what is Triumph Comics? Like, what is the Lynx? Like Lost Tales of the Legendary Lynx? Like it's totally already happening. But
you want to trick reviewers into being like a new, like, upstart comic, company.
Yeah, exactly. Like these collections of these lost 70s comics have been finally reprinted. Yeah.
I love too that the Lynx's city is Triumph City.
Yeah.
I love that. I
Yeah, it's
love
just like comics are so like that. Like I wanted to really like embrace comics. So for me, it was like the contrast of noir and crime and mystery and the kind of wow wonder of comics that I had as a kid and still have as an adult. And it's like, how do you blend that and make it work? I hope it landed. So,
Yeah, it totally did. It
oh,
did.
thank you.
Well, you know, one thing that I love about you, Alex, so much is that you are such a positive force
Oh,
in the
thank you. You too.
world. And oh, thank you. You really truly are, like, just on social media and when you talk about books and other artists, you're always elevating others. And I think there is an opportunity here for you to do what you do best, and which is to elevate others. And so, are there any comics right now that you're into that you could recommend that are written by women comic book writers who would have been sort of like, who would have looked at Carmen and been like, that's like, she laid down the pavement for me, right? Like, so
Yeah, exactly.
the women writers.
I love the comics of Kelly Thompson. She wrote this great run on Hawkeye, not Hawkeye, but Kate Bishop Hawkeye. That is fantastic. Kelly Sue DeConnick is amazing. I really love this indie cartoonist, Gabrielle Bell. She does like slice of life stories that are so fantastic and personal. Sarah Glidden is a really fantastic graphic novelist. She does like journalistic graphic novels, like, you know, where she's like lit in a war zone, or she's like, you know, very intense stuff. And who else I'm looking at my shelf. Julia Wirtz is really good. She does kind of funny like strips, but they're very personal and from her perspective, just dealing with, you know, dealing with alcoholism, dealing with like personal problems, having children, like all these like narratives that are, yeah, there's so many great women in comics. It's amazing. It's a golden age, I think.
I think that's wonderful. And the fact that you can just look to it yourself and be like, oh yeah, that one, that one, that one.
Yeah. And Trina Robbins obviously is like a super legend. Like she's even mentioned in the novel. She's like,
yeah. And that's fantastic. Even thinking back, I know we've talked a little bit about what were things like in the 70s, but even when we were teenagers in the 90s, you couldn't have, I don't think you could have rattled off a list like that.
I think the first one I remember reading was Ann Nesenti when she was doing Daredevil. And I was like, oh, there's a woman writing Daredevil. And I thought that was so cool. Just the same way that like identification is so important. Not that I am a woman identifying, but you know, when I saw like Spider-Man 2099 and I saw that he was Mexican Irish, and I was like, there's a like Hispanic Spider-Man. How cool is that? You know, so it's important, you know, it's important to the next generation to see themselves.
Absolutely.
You know,
I mean, even I remember really, really clearly getting onto these comics in the 90s, like in the grunge era. Like it was like right in the middle of all of it. And
right.
Action Girl. Do you remember Action Girl comics?
Yeah.
Action, and they were like, they didn't go for very long. Maybe like a one or two like runs, and they were different independent comic book artists were featured, and they were all women. And like very young Chantel in her flannel in Miami, being very
listening to Pearl Jam
and being very obsessed with Action Girl and feeling like I was getting a lesson in like feminism and what it meant to be a woman. And it was comic books, like it was those books, it was those Action Girl books, you know.
I mean, I learned about like American culture from Archie comics, like how like kids behaved in high school, like what it meant to like have seasons. Like it's, you know, it's, people underestimate the power of comics. And that whole idea of like underground comics and women working in comics, like there's the character Marion in the book. I didn't want to just make it about superhero comics. I wanted to show that there was like a wider world of comics. And so when her and Carmen connect, she basically says, you know, I think superhero comics are lame. Like I come from this background. I come from San Francisco where I did this. I wrote stories about like my personal life and things like that. So, I mean, I know superhero, you know, a lot of people misconstrue comics as a genre, and it's a medium. It's a way to tell any kind of story. You can tell memoir, science fiction, crime. And I just wanted to show that because, you know, superheroes are mainstream in the comics world, but there are so many other kinds of comics too.
Right. I think you captured all of that.
Oh, good.
Well, let's turn, because folks are starting to populate the Q&A and the
chat. Yeah, let's see what they say.
I want to go to someone who, the first person to jump into the Q&A is more of a comment, but it's a lovely comment. I'm a dyslexic 60-year-old. Comics were such a huge part of my young reading world. Thank you for your contribution to readers like me. And I do audiobooks a lot now. So you've got
awesome.
Thank you there. But you've got a question from Dave in the Q&A. After doing a series like the Pete Fernandez books, how challenging was it to jump into this new character and story? And then Dave goes on to ask if it was made easier by having written comics in between the Pete books, as well as the Poe Dameron novel.
You know, the Poe Dameron novel was like such a great like palate cleanser. It was like, somebody gave me the keys to this amazing universe and just said, create this story. And it was all set up for me so I could have this great time. But while I was writing Poe with like most of my brain, the rest of my brain was like working on Secret Identity and thinking about Secret Identity and kind of really like living in the world and like figuring out, because I didn't want the characters to feel just like archetypes. Like a lot of times like comic fans will say, oh, is Carlisle supposed to be Stan Lee, or is this person supposed to be this artist? And it's not one for one. So I really wanted everyone to feel like unique and compelling. And, you know, there's a villain, like there's a murderer, but I don't think there's a lot of villains in the book. Everyone's really kind of complicated and gray. And I think that's a byproduct of wanting to spend time with these people and make them really developed characters. But it was hard because when I started it, I thought it would be a standalone. And now I'm working on the sequel, which is like a challenge. Like, yeah, it's like challenging because as I was writing Secret Identity, I realized there was another story to tell, like about modern comics and IP and like commodification of art. And, you know, how do you survive as an artist in the social media age? And what would Carmen do like today? Like, what would she be doing if she saw like Triumph Entertainment say they're going to do a Lethal Links movie, which is kind of part of the plot. And so, yeah, you know, it's interesting how where our muse takes us, because I thought, okay, this will just be a one-off. I'll be able to write it because I know comics, and it ended up being super research intensive. I really got immersed in the world, and now I don't really want to leave yet.
Right. Well, that's actually one of the, I think, no, someone was asking, Oline asked if you would continue to write about the comic book world in another mystery. So it sounds like the answer is yes.
Yeah, I think I have one more. And so this new book, I mean, we're just launching Secret Identity, but the new book is going to be set in the modern day and feature a new protagonist who's this woman, and she is, you know, she used to want to draw superhero comics, but for whatever reason lost that opportunity. And so she became this like indie cartoonist, like doing New Yorker illustrations and doing her own graphic novels. And but she's never been shy about saying she loves comics, and she loves this particularly obscure character from the 70s called the Legendary Lynx, and nobody talks about it. And, you know, then there's like a deadline announcement saying, you know, Triumph Entertainment announces relaunch of Legendary Lynx TV series and comic book series. So then there's like a social media groundswell of people saying, we need to get this artist to work on the Lynx. And so she takes the assignment. And at the same time, she's writing like a memoir graphic novel about the experience of working on the Lynx. And as she's doing it, she starts getting these mysterious messages from someone saying, there's a lot more to what you're doing than you think there is. You need to dig a little bit deeper into what this character is and who created this character. And that puts her in a weird, and then then the mystery starts to unravel. So that's just like the, you know, the first
very cool
chunk of pages. But yeah,
really cool and really clever too, because what do you do, right? Do you then just kill someone else in front of Carmen? You know what I mean?
Right. So, yeah. I mean, it's also hard. Like you want to, for me, I think it was like verisimilitude to make it feel like it could have happened. So if like all the murders are happening in this one company, it becomes like a little harder to believe.
Yeah, no, this sounds like a fantastic concept. Yeah, that's always the tricky thing with mysteries, you know, when it's like a real world, like just a regular person who's the PI, and then
like you expect a murder to happen. Yeah.
Right, that people just drop dead around them all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's great. Let's go back to the questions. Let's see. Donna would like to know, if since this was collaborative, how much input did you have in the artwork of the comic?
I had a lot. I mean, Sandy's a great artist, so I didn't want to like pull him back and like overwrite. So in comics, you can write it two ways. You can do it like straight script to start, and basically what you're saying in the script is like panel 1, Lynx jumping over the rooftops, like include X and Y. Panel 2, close-up shot of the Lynx. Like you get very detailed, and you're basically guiding the artist through what they draw. Or what we did is much more organic, where I kind of sent him like 4 or 5 sentences or a paragraph, and I said, you know, it's like 2 or 3 pages. The Lynx will be jumping through the air. Then she's going to see her target from a distance. She throws a star. It hits the target. She jumps on him. We end on a close-up of her shocked face. Like, you know, you give a sense of what the scene is, but you don't dictate like camera angles and things like that, because he's an artist, so he's going to know what to do better than I can. But I had a lot of say, and like if things didn't seem right, I could give notes and stuff like that, because he would do like a rough layout, and then I would give notes, and then I would script over that, which just means I would then come up with the dialogue and the captions, and then Taylor would do that, and the art would be finished under it. So
right. And because you've worked with Sandy before, then I think there's also a layer of trust there.
Yeah, and we're friends, and I know he's just like amazing. So it's not like I would have probably done full script if it had been an unknown artist, but I also don't think I would have done this personal a project with somebody I didn't trust like implicitly.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Let's see another question. This is from Kareen. Hey, Alex, so happy for you on the success of your book. Do you give yourself a timeline to get a book finished from the time an idea is born?
I'm a pretty fast writer. So once I have an outline, I can crank a first draft out, and I don't want to overstate my speed, but like I can do like 4 or 5 months, I can crank a first draft. So I try to stick to like a book a year. Like I didn't have a book last year, but I was working on this book because I knew it was coming out this year. And I'm going to have another novel later this year that hasn't been announced. And then I hope to have the sequel in 23, like late 23. So yeah, I try to stick to that a book a year cycle. And part of it, I outline pretty heavily, and I try to like create a structure for myself, but not so much that the characters are like trapped, like they have to do what I've outlined. And Marion, the character we were talking about before, is a great example because she was only meant to be that herald of doom at the beginning. Like there's that volleyball game, and
Right.
Marion basically says, "Watch out for Harvey."
Mhm.
And I thought that would be it. She'll go away. And then she ended up showing up again and again and again. And I had to have like the flexibility to let Carmen follow her down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you did that, but you made that choice because the moment Marion comes on the page, I'm intrigued by her.
Yeah,
Like,
she's so
ooh,
compelling.
I
Yeah.
can't wait for her to come back, So if she had just been in and out that way.
It would have been sad because she's also like super fun to write.
Yeah, she's great. She's great. She's super powerful.
Yeah.
I love her so much. Let me ask you before I move on to the other question. Have you always been a plotter like that? Like, have you always outlined?
No, I think very foolishly I was not when I first started. Like when I did Silent City, I went to BoucherCon, which is like a big mystery book convention. And I remember listening to Michael Connelly, and I raised my hand sheepishly because I love his books. And I was like, do you plot or do you like outline? And he was like, I just start writing. And I was like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. And I remember telling my girlfriend, now my wife, and she was like, well, he's Michael Connelly. Like, you're just getting started. Like, she was just very honest. And so I started writing. I would start writing, and then have a quarter through, I realized I needed some structure. And so I'd outline a little bit, write through that outline a little more. And I would never wish that process on anyone. So eventually I became like a very strict outliner. Like the outline for the new book is like 30,000 words, single space, just because I need to feel like I know where it's going, especially with the ending and with the mystery. Like, I hate mysteries that I read and you get to the end and it's like, oh, it was that guy Bill you saw in chapter 2 and never saw again. And I hope you're good with that because we're at the end. And that, to me, it has to really be earned. And so part of that is knowing when to drop the little red, the clues and the red herrings.
Yes, absolutely. Similarly, my first 2 books, I was like, I'm just gonna.
Yeah. What was it like for you?
Right. It was horrible. Like
it's hard.
They take a long time. You write yourself into terrible corners that you have to write yourself out of, right? Like it was painful. And with the next book after that, which was The Distant Marvels, I was like, I'm not even going to start it until I know how it ends. And it took me like years, right, to come up with the ending. I had all these concepts, but no ending. But then when I had the ending, it was like fire, right? Then you're zipping towards it, and everything that I've written since has been like, I won't start until I know what's on.
Yeah, no, I need to know where it's going because revision becomes super painful. And to me now, revision is fun. It's like you're decorating the house that you built already.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But people are, what do they call them? Pantsers, who go by the seat of their pants.
Yeah.
There are pants. People who entire careers are done that way. So
Ayatu, I guess.
Ayatu.
Yeah, I mean,
like
if
that,
it works for you.
That's good for you. Yeah, that works. You mentioned a Comic-Con, like going to a con. And Emma is asking, will you be at Comic-Con?
I'm not sure. I mean, just to be real, like I'm waiting for my youngest to get vaccinated. So I'm kind of avoiding like super big, like in-person events, but maybe, hopefully by then. So
yeah, they're super fun,
Yeah. I love Comic-Cons. Yeah. I love seeing my friends and like just being in the industry. Yeah.
Yeah. I can even imagine the new novel, right? A con with all the Lynx fans.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's definitely it'll be interesting.
Yeah, that'll be super fun. Mag just got an interesting question. It was on my mind too. So I love the idea that you made the character a female and that the story addresses the way women were in many ways used in the industry, but not given equal standing or recognition. I'm curious why you chose a woman as the character in that time frame and not a male character. And I would ask, she's a queer woman too. So like, what was your thinking behind that choice?
Yeah, I think the challenge sometimes for us is, our characters appear to us and are pretty fully formed. Like when I saw Carmen in my mind, like I saw who she was, and that's not a free pass to write that character. I think a lot of older authors, not to like riff too much on this, but a lot of older authors feel like there's an entitlement to be able to write whatever you want, no matter what. And I don't think that's accurate. I think we can technically do that as long as you do the homework, like you do the work and you talk to people and you have sensitivity readers who can tell you if you're like in the ballpark. Like at the end of the day, it's a mystery. It's not like I'm not trying to like zone in on Carmen's like defining like queer experience, but she is a queer woman and I wanted to reflect that thoughtfully. So I tried to be, I talked to people, I had people read the draft. And as for why, I think it just would have been a very different story. It's kind of, you'd have to flip the script and look at it from Harvey's perspective. Like it would kind of be about Harvey. And that to me is not as interesting with him as a protagonist. Like to me, I wanted to talk about what comics were like and what a challenge it was like for someone like Carmen to get purchased. And that to me is really compelling and worth including, like, and having that perspective.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree with you. And I think writing from a perspective that's not necessarily your own, or it's not your own identity, requires commitment and understanding and research, like, and I think you can't just wing it, right? Those are things you have to think carefully.
Yeah, you can't, you have to really like, and I took a lot of notes. Like I got notes from those readers that they were like, this is not working, or you may want to look at this in a different way. And I think you have to be open, because I think a lot of people throw around the term of like sensitivity reader as like a free pass. It's not a free pass. It just means they read it. And hopefully the readers who eventually will read it will think you did a good job.
Right. Yeah.
I hope.
Well, I mean, I think you did a great job. We got a fun question from Nancy Klingener. She wants to know.
Oh, cool. Hey, Nancy.
Hey, Nancy. Do you like any TV shows based on comics? And if so, which ones?
I really loved WandaVision, which I saw recently, which was a blast. And I'm not like a super Avengers person. I was much more of an X-Men kid, like the weird outcasts. And I loved WandaVision just because it was a little meta and the kind of different episodes in different eras of sitcoms. I like the Netflix shows like Daredevil. I went through a period where I was watching a lot of Arrow. Like Arrow is really good, like workout TV. Like when you're working out, you just have a show that is like just beautiful people like doing crazy things. And yeah, those are the ones that come to mind.
Those are
but
all
I'm
good.
also like, yeah, I mean, I'm excited for the Batman, which I haven't seen yet.
Me neither. I haven't seen it.
It's 3 hours long, so it's like a commitment.
And again, it's a theater, and I'm still kind of weird about theaters right now, but
yeah, same.
Yeah, but yeah, I think the one I got obsessed with, and I was very cottoned on very late, was I'm Agent Carter.
Oh yeah, that was good.
Agent Carter after everyone else did, and I loved it. I loved how it was retro because it was set in the past, but it was also still retro because I think it was one of the earliest of the new generation of those shows. And I just
did you watch Hawkeye or no?
Yes, loved it.
It's good. I liked it.
It was so good too. Yeah, I get very excited.
Yeah.
And all
I'm so stoked for Moon Knight. I think that'll be really cool. I love Oscar Isaac. I think it's a golden age for comic fans. Like you can see all your favorite characters on TV.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. I never would have imagined.
Never, right? Like our childhood, it was Superman. It was Christopher Reeve. So that was excellent. Like they talk about like setting the bar.
Yeah. I mean, when Batman came out, that was like a seismic moment, like Michael Keaton as Batman and like Dick Tracy and stuff like that. But it was never like this thing where it was a new one every month, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah. And people are still excited. It doesn't seem to be waning, and we can probably go on and on about like how superheroes are archetypal and
exactly.
like that's the human psyche.
It's our modern mythology. Like in a lot of ways, like that's what people see as our mythology.
Yeah. See, Magda was also an Agent Carter fan. Also disappointed when they canceled it. I mean,
it was a bummer.
Magda, what are you gonna do?
Maybe she'll come back.
Yeah, some Arrow fans also. Let's see. There's another question from Magda, kind of, which is attached to the last one about sort of your choice of writing Carmen. Would it have been a challenge for a Hispanic male in that time frame?
I think so. I think there are. I don't think it would have been as challenging. I mean, I think it would have been harder than it certainly is today. Like, I think we're seeing a lot more diverse voices telling diverse stories, which is great, especially like Latinx creators in comics. I think we're seeing like a good big uptick that even when I started writing, I didn't see a lot, but now I'm seeing so many talented like Latinx female and male writers. So it's great. And artists.
And anthologies coming out and like issues with what
Yeah.
was the one that just came out with all the Latinx creators?
Oh, Comunidades, the Marvel.
Comunidades,
Yeah, I was in it. Yeah, I got to write.
I know. I won't bring it out. It's back there somewhere.
Okay.
But
yeah.
It's such a great issue.
Yeah, it was so cool.
Yeah.
That was like really, I grew up a Marvel kid. I mean, I love DC too, but I was like a Marvel, like Spider-Man kid. So to get the chance to write a story for Marvel was wild.
Yeah. I think it's a beautiful comic. I'm trying to see if there's any new questions coming in. Oh, there's one. Oh, it's a nice compliment. Remembering the podcast with Mitchell Kaplan, The Literary Life. I was riding the bus, almost missed my stop because I got so much into your conversation.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that was such a great, it was so fun to just sit and hang out. Like I miss doing that with people.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think hopefully we're
Get there.
returning to it. Are you doing any in-person events or is it all this way?
I did a launch at the Strand in here because it's like the Strand, like, I mean, and when I'm come down, I'll do books and books because it's books and books.
Of course. And we've got that lovely courtyard too. And so
yeah,
outside.
Yeah, we'll do it again. We'll do this
I'm
again.
going to take you up on that. I am going to hold
I guarantee it.
Okay, we're going to recreate this in person.
Yeah.
The dynamic duo right here.
Exactly.
You mentioned books and books and Christina's like, I'm back. It was so fun chatting with you, Alex.
Oh, thanks so much. You're the best. I'm so grateful that you were able to do this.
Thank you both so much. I was going to say, there's so much Spanish in the book. I love that. I mean, did you get any pushback from the publisher or were they all about it?
The only thing I said is don't italicize it. Like, just make sure it's there and that people have to read it like they would read anything else because Carmen's bilingual and Cuban and American and that's how it is. So that's how it was for me as a kid and how it was for her. And so
I really love that. And I'm sure it hasn't been done too much either.
I don't know. Yeah. I mean, it just felt like that was the true path for that. So.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. We're going to see you in person. I'm going to
yes, for sure.
Hold you to it. Thank you for joining us. Thanks to everyone watching, to my
thanks, Chantel,
for supporting us. And have a great evening and get Secret Identity if you don't already have it.
Thank you so much. This was amazing.
Okay. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.